your book, I think, also pulls out quite clearly that there are civilizational tectonic shifts that are underway. You talk about demographics. You cite people like Paul Morland, the demographer, to talk about how we're trending toward very few people, not just in the Western world, but in many different parts of the world. And this makes the organization of big states a bit harder, not least because of fallen tax revenue and the like. And some of the responses that we've seen, such as mass immigration, is causing, for many people, a sense of cultural dislocation. And so even if you could go and hire all of those care workers from poorer parts of the world, is then you're depriving them of people who could care for their own compatriots, as it were. And so I'm going to try to avoid going into a doomerist mode, because I think we should always retain a sense of hope. But if you do look at the civilizational strands that are being pulled on really heavily here, so you've got immigration of distinct peoples on a large scale, we've got low social cohesion on that, and less future support for welfare programs, and then even because of the narrowing demographics, we're going to have lower tax base for that. We've got growing regional imbalances here in the United Kingdom, but you could argue in other parts of Europe too. That declining fertility, we've got low trust in institutions and public officials. And I suppose what you are starting to see is a positive response to that. You do see some people attempting to look after themselves through grassroots organizations. You cite some in your book. And I see amongst certainly some of the more conservatively minded Gen Z is people who are throwing themselves into committed relationships and marriage much sooner, and championing traditional values. And so my crackpot theory as a potential scenario here, this civilizational shift, is given the pressures coming on the nation state and all of that low trust and these regional imbalances and potential fractures, perhaps we're starting to see the unraveling of the recent technology of the nation state. I don't know, maybe it's a bit Oswald Spengler decline of the West for you, David. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I do think there is a kind of degree of, particularly in this country, the kind of Anglo-Saxon countries are famous for their short-termism. Well, I think this is we're kind of verging on civilizational short-termism when you talk about the Treasury model is about maximizing workforce, GDP, and tax income today, but only by making it harder to raise the stable families of the future. And I do think it's demography. It's the economics that may come to our aid here. The economics of low fertility, which is associated with kind of lower marriage rates, more unstable families, certainly makes it. It's obviously lower fertility is also associated with women's freedom, but we can overshoot in these areas, and we still have this fertility gap. Women and young parents say they want more children than they're having, and we should do all we can to imagine if we valued reproduction in the same way that we value production. That we would create a much more family friendly arrangement for people in those reproductive years, for men and women to share the burdens, and for companies in the state to help. I do think that it's GDP thinking. GDP thinking has become so dominant, as if, and just the way that we count what we regard as economically productive. I mean, how could it not be productive to create the stable, well-balanced children of the future who are going to be the workers of the future and the taxpayers of the future? And I think it is. I really do think people have talked about the limits of GDP accounting for decades. I mean, it's not a used subject at all, but I think it's becoming more and more dysfunctional, particularly as actually as an aging society, we're actually spending more time at home, doing more productive work at home, whether it is raising children, we're doing that less, it's true, but we're also working, helping, looking after old people at home more. And a lot of that does happen in the GDP economy. A lot of it happens outside the GDP economy. That some of these distinctions are becoming increasingly sort of pointless in some ways, and we need to count both types of work, whether it's paid for or not, as productive work. So we're spending more time at home. We have working from home as a result of partly as a result of the pandemic, the whole Zoom economy, particularly with their laptop classes. We have AI that is presumably going to reduce the working week at some point in the near future. We have men stepping up more, doing more work in the domestic childcare field, in the domestic realm. So I mean, all that we're sort of, the GDP is sort of setting ourselves up to fail in some ways. That the way we currently count productive work is setting ourselves up to fail. And I think we really do need to go back and look at that. I think that it's not. So I mean, I don't think it is an entirely pessimistic story. I actually remember when I wrote my book, The Road to Somewhere, where I created these labels, the Anywheres, in some ways. Book I was writing it in 2016, and I remember looking at the issue of the family for the first time. I'd never really been particularly interested in family politics before, and I was really surprised to find, I mean, both how little support we have. I mean, I kind of stumbled across this sort of this gap that I mentioned earlier, this huge gap between probably the biggest one in all of public policy, between the views of ordinary people. They're there in the British Social Attitude Survey. They're no secret, but the views of ordinary people about a lot of these things, and the views of the political class. I mean, something I think I forgot to mention earlier, when I mentioned Jeremy Hunt and his why are you women wasting your talents on mothering, as he was announcing this expansion of childcare. The families that will benefit most from this expansion of childcare subsidy to children as young as 9 months will be those households where both parents work full time, which is about a third of families with children. The proportion of the British public who think that is the best arrangement for the best family arrangement is 9%. This is not many people are forced into it. Many people want to do it, and they obviously they should be free to do that. But most people do not think this is an ideal arrangement.